The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of LAX Terminal B as Lisa walked briskly through the crew entrance, her perfectly pressed Pacific Global Airlines uniform reflecting her attention to detail. She had spent over a decade building her reputation as one of the airline's most professional flight attendants, and today marked another milestone in her carefully planned career. She couldn't help but smile as she made her way to the crew briefing room. After 12 years of clogging the ranks, countless red-eye flights, and missing more family gatherings than she cared to count, she had finally secured the route every flight attendant dreamed of, the prestigious Los Angeles to Singapore first-class cabin service. "Good morning, everyone." The lead purser greeted the assembled crew. Lisa sat up straighter, notebook ready. This wasn't just another flight for her. This was the crown jewel of Pacific Global's routes, where celebrities, business tycoons, and political figures regularly traveled. The 16-hour journey featured the airline's newest aircraft, complete with private suites and a dedicated chef on board. As the briefing continued, Lisa mentally reviewed her personal checklist. She had spent hours studying the wine list, memorizing the details of each vintage they served. She knew the thread count of the Egyptian cotton vetting and could describe every ingredient in their signature caviar service. This attention to detail had earned her numerous commendations and the highest passenger satisfaction scores in her division. "Remember," the purser concluded, "we're expecting a full first-class cabin today, including several VIP passengers." Lisa felt a flutter of excitement. VIP passengers meant opportunities to demonstrate her exceptional service skills and perhaps earn recognition from upper management. In the galley, Lisa meticulously arranged her service cart, ensuring every glass sparkled and each napkin was folded with military precision. Her colleagues often teased her about her perfectionism, but it had gotten her where she was today. From growing up in a small town where being a flight attendant seemed like an impossible dream, to now serving in first class on one of the world's most prestigious routes, she had earned every step of her success. She checked her reflection one last time in the galley mirror, adjusting her scarf to Pacific Global's exact specifications. Her uniform was spotless, her makeup flawless, and her hair styled precisely according to company standards. Lisa had learned early in her career that in first-class service, appearance wasn't just about looking good. It was about embodying the luxury and sophistication that passengers expected. As pre-boarding began, Lisa positioned herself at the cabin entrance, ready to welcome the elite travelers who had paid thousands of dollars for the privilege of flying in Pacific Global's premier cabin. She knew that each interaction, no matter how brief, would contribute to the airline's reputation for excellence. "This is what you've worked for," she whispered to herself, smoothing her skirt one last time. The familiar scent of the new cabin surrounded her, a mix of leather, fresh linens, and the subtle signature fragrance Pacific Global used in their first-class cabins. Everything was perfect, just as she'd imagined it countless times during her years working in economy and business class. Little did Lisa know that this flight would test not just her professional skills, but her entire worldview. As the first passengers began approaching the cabin, she plastered on her practiced smile, unaware that the next few hours would change the course of her career in ways she could never have imagined. The prestigious Los Angeles to Singapore route was about to become much more than just another milestone in her carefully planned journey to the top. The first-class cabin was starting to fill with its usual mix of business travelers in designer suits and celebrities hiding behind sunglasses when Lisa noticed them. A family of 4 standing uncertainly near the entrance. The father wore a simple polo shirt and khakis that had seen better days. The mother, carrying a sleeping toddler, had on a modest sundress, while their older child, maybe 7 or 8, clutched a well-worn backpack shaped like a dinosaur. Lisa's perfectly maintained smile tightened slightly. She'd seen this before. Economy passengers who had wandered into the wrong cabin during boarding. It happened at least once every few flights, and she prided herself on handling such situations with smooth efficiency. "Excuse me," she said, approaching them with practiced grace. "I believe economy class boarding is through the rear entrance. Let me help direct you." She gestured toward the back of the plane, maintaining her professional tone despite her growing impatience. The first-class cabin was her responsibility, and she needed everything to be perfect. The father looked up from his phone, his expression calm. "Oh no, we're in the right place. We're in seats 2A through D." He started reaching for their boarding passes, but Lisa had already made up her mind. "Sir," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow managed to sound both polite and patronizing. "These are first-class suites. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." She glanced meaningfully at their casual attire and worn luggage. Behind them, other passengers were starting to queue up, and Lisa could feel her perfect boarding process slipping away. The mother shifted her sleeping toddler to her other hip, looking uncomfortable but determined. "We have our tickets," she said softly, trying not to wake the child. "We're supposed to be here." Lisa's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened slightly. She'd worked too hard and too long to let her first day on this premium route be disrupted. "Let me just double-check those boarding passes," she said, holding out her hand with an air of authority that suggested she was doing them a favor. The father began pulling out their documents, but his movements were too slow for Lisa's liking. Other passengers were watching now, some with curiosity, others with apparent annoyance at the delay. A prominent CEO Lisa recognized from magazine covers checked his watch pointedly. "Perhaps it would be better if you stepped aside for a moment," Lisa suggested, her tone growing firmer. "I need to keep the boarding process moving for our other passengers." She emphasized the word "other" ever so slightly, making it clear which passengers she considered legitimate. The older child looked up at his parents, confusion and embarrassment written across his face. "Dad, are we in trouble?" he asked, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. The mother's cheeks flushed, but she stood her ground. Lisa felt her professional mask slipping as frustration set in. This was supposed to be her perfect flight, her chance to prove she belonged on this elite route. Instead, she was dealing with what she was certain was a ticketing error that would require her supervisor's intervention. "I'm going to have to call my supervisor to sort this out," she announced, reaching for her intercom handset. "In the meantime, please step aside so our first-class passengers can board." She gestured to the small alcove near the galley, making it clear she expected them to move. The father and mother exchanged a look, one that Lisa would soon come to replay in her mind countless times in the days ahead. It wasn't anger or defiance in their eyes. It was something far worse, quiet dignity in the face of prejudice. But in that moment, all Lisa could see was a problem that needed to be solved, unaware that she was about to learn one of the most important lessons of her career. The tension in the first-class cabin grew thicker as Lisa's supervisor, Mrs. Thompson, clicked her way down the aisle in response to the call. The family stood quietly by the galley, the father gently rubbing his wife's back as she tried to keep their toddler from waking. Their older son had shrunk behind his dinosaur backpack, clearly wishing he could disappear. "What seems to be the issue here?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her experienced eyes taking in the situation. Before the family could speak, Lisa jumped in, her words coming out in a rushed whisper. "These people insist they have first-class tickets, but there must be some mistake. They're clearly—" Lisa paused, searching for a diplomatic way to express what seemed obvious to her. "They seem to have gotten confused during boarding." The father stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "There's no confusion. We have valid tickets for seats 2A through D." He held out their boarding passes, which Mrs. Thompson took with a professional nod. By now, the scene had drawn the attention of every passenger in the cabin. A couple in designer clothing exchanged knowing looks. A businessman loudly cleared his throat, checking his expensive watch for the third time. The whispers had started, not quite quiet enough to be discreet. "Well, this is awkward," someone muttered from seat 1B. "Never seen anything like this in first class," another passenger commented, not bothering to lower their voice. The mother's face flushed deeper, but she held her head high, gently swaying to keep her toddler asleep despite the growing commotion. The older boy had tears forming in his eyes, though he was trying hard to be brave. Mrs. Thompson studied the boarding passes, her expression shifting subtly. She pulled out her tablet, tapped a few times, and looked up with a completely different demeanor. "These tickets are absolutely valid," she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. Lisa felt her stomach drop. "But there must be some mistake," she protested, her voice wavering slightly. "This is our premium cabin." And what exactly?" the father asked quietly, speaking up for the first time since the supervisor arrived. "What about us makes you think we don't belong here?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly very interested in their phones or the safety cards in their seat pockets. I just assumed." Lisa stumbled over her words, her carefully maintained professional facade cracking. "You assumed," the mother said softly, still cradling her sleeping toddler, "that because of how we look, how we dress, we couldn't possibly afford to be here. That we couldn't belong in your perfect first-class cabin." The truth of those words hit Lisa like a physical blow. Her face burned as she realized how her actions must have appeared to everyone watching. The family hadn't raised their voices or caused a scene. She had done that all by herself. "Please," Mrs. Thompson said, gesturing to their assigned seats, "let me escort you to your suite. I apologize for any inconvenience." She shot Lisa a look that clearly said they would be having a conversation later. As the family settled into their seats, their older son finally letting go of his dinosaur backpack, Lisa stood rooted to the spot. Everything she thought she knew about providing premium service suddenly felt hollow. She had been so focused on maintaining what she thought was the perfect first-class environment that she had forgotten the most basic element of hospitality, treating everyone with dignity and respect. Little did she know, her humiliation was far from complete. The real shock was still to come, and it would force her to question everything she thought she knew about success, status, and what it truly meant to provide first-class service. 3 hours into the flight to Singapore, Lisa was going through the motions of her service duties, but her usual confidence had vanished. She kept replaying the boarding incident in her mind, feeling worse with each recollection. The family in seats 2A through D had been nothing but polite, even after her behavior, which only added to her shame. The night flight was quiet, with most passengers either sleeping or working on their laptops. Lisa was restocking the gallery when she felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Mrs. Thompson, and her expression made Lisa's heart sink. "We need to talk," Mrs. Thompson whispered, gesturing for Lisa to follow her to the crew rest area. "I just received an urgent message from headquarters." Lisa's hands grew cold. This was it. She was about to lose everything she'd worked for. Her dream position, her career, all gone because of her own prejudice. She followed Mrs. Thompson with leaden feet. Once they were alone, Mrs. Thompson took a deep breath. "Do you know who that family is?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lisa shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. "The man you tried to remove from first class." Mrs. Thompson continued, "That's Mr. Puddle. As in, the owner of Rising Sun Investments. His company just completed a majority purchase of Pacific Global Airlines last week. He's not just a first-class passenger, he's technically our new boss." The information hit Lisa like a physical blow. She grabbed the nearest jump seat to steady herself, her legs suddenly weak. Rising Sun Investments was a major business news story. They'd been all over the financial papers for their recent acquisitions. And she had just humiliated their CEO in front of an entire cabin of passengers. He was doing an incognito flight inspection, Mrs. Thompson explained, her voice gentle but serious. "It's a common practice among airline owners, traveling like regular passengers to experience the service firsthand." His wife suggested they dress casually to get a true picture of how all passengers are treated. Lisa sank into the jump seat, her perfectly pressed uniform feeling like it was suffocating her. I I had no idea, she whispered, though she knew that was no excuse. That's exactly the point, Mrs. Thompson said. We shouldn't treat anyone differently, whether they're a CEO or a student flying for the first time. That's what real luxury service means. Through the curtain, Lisa could see Mr. Patel helping his older son build something with the airline's first-class amenity kit boxes. His wife was reading a story to their now-awake toddler, who was giggling quietly. They looked like any other loving family enjoying their flight. What happens now? Lisa asked, her voice trembling. Am I fired? Mrs. Thompson checked her tablet again. Actually, that's the surprising part. Mr. Patel hasn't filed any complaint. Instead, he's requested a meeting with you after we land. Lisa felt her stomach twist into an even tighter knot. A personal meeting with the new owner after she treated his family so poorly. She couldn't imagine anything more terrifying. He was very specific, Mrs. Thompson added, studying the message. He said he wants to discuss something important with you, but not as a disciplinary matter. Lisa stared through the galley window at the dark night sky, her mind racing. What could the owner of the airline possibly want to discuss with a flight attendant who had just shown the worst side of their customer service? She had spent years building her career on her ability to provide perfect luxury service, only to discover that she had completely misunderstood what luxury truly meant. As she watched the family in row 2 sharing their time together, Lisa realized that the next few hours would be the longest of her career. Each passing minute brought her closer to a meeting that could change everything, though not in the way she imagined. News travels fast on an airplane, especially among the crew. By the time they were halfway to Singapore, every flight attendant knew about the incident with the airline's new owner. Lisa could feel their stares and hear the whispers that stopped whenever she entered the galley. Some looked at her with pity, others with barely concealed judgment. I heard she tried to make them leave first class. One flight attendant whispered to another when they thought Lisa couldn't hear. Can you imagine? Of all the passengers to upset. The voices trailed off as Lisa walked past, her face burning. She focused on her tasks, double and triple checking every detail to keep her mind occupied. But her usual precise movements felt mechanical now, empty of the pride that had once filled them. In row 2, Mr. Patel's family continued their flight as if nothing had happened. When Lisa brought their meals, the mother smiled warmly at her. Their older son showed her his completed amenity kit creation, a little airplane he'd built from the boxes. The toddler waved cheerfully every time she passed. Their kindness only made Lisa feel worse. During one trip through the cabin, she overheard snippets of Mr. Patel explaining something to his son. Sometimes people make mistakes, he was saying softly. What matters is what they learn from them. Was he talking about her? Lisa hurried past, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted a passenger's blanket. She had always been so sure of herself, of her place in the airline's hierarchy. Now, every interaction felt uncertain. Mrs. Thompson pulled her aside during a quiet moment. The crew was talking, she said gently. I know this is difficult, but try to stay focused on your duties. Lisa nodded, blinking back tears. How do I face them? The family, the other crew members. Everyone knows what I did. You face them by doing your job, Mrs. Thompson replied. By showing that you understand where you went wrong. Actions speak louder than words. As the flight progressed, Lisa noticed something else. The other first-class passengers were watching too. The businessman who had checked his watch so impatiently during boarding now avoided making eye contact when she served his coffee. The couple in designer clothing whispered behind their menus, glancing between her and the Patel family. They had all witnessed her prejudice, her baseless assumptions. The perfect image she'd worked so hard to maintain had cracked, revealing something ugly underneath. Each time she walked through the cabin, she felt the weight of their observations. The toddler and 2C started fussing during meal service, and Lisa instinctively reached for the spare coloring book she kept for such situations. She hesitated. Would they think she was only being nice now because she knew who they were? But Mrs. Patel caught her eye and nodded encouragingly. "Thank you," she said warmly as Lisa handed over the coloring book. "That's very thoughtful." The simple kindness nearly undid Lisa completely. She retreated to the galley, pretending to organize supplies while she gathered herself. Through the galley window, she could see the sun starting to rise over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In a few hours, they would land in Singapore, and she would have to face Mr. Patel in that meeting. The thought made her stomach clench. But as she watched his family, the way they treated everyone with respect, the gentle way he spoke to his children, the kindness they showed even to her, she began to understand that maybe this meeting wasn't about punishment at all. Perhaps, though she didn't dare to hope too much, it was about something else entirely. Something that might help her become not just a better flight attendant, but a better person. The Singapore airport buzzed with early morning activity as Lisa waited outside the airline's private lounge. Her uniform, still crisp despite the long flight, felt like a costume now. She watched other crew members walking past, heading home or to their hotels, while she sat waiting for a meeting she dreaded. A gentle tap on her shoulder made her jump. It was Mrs. Patel, without the children. "He's ready to see you now," she said with a kind smile that made Lisa's guilt resurface. "Don't worry too much." The private lounge was quieter than Lisa expected. Mr. Patel sat at a small table near the window, the Singapore skyline stretching out behind him. He looked different now, more commanding in a business suit, though his eyes held the same gentle expression she'd seen when he was playing with his son. "Please, sit down." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Would you like some tea?" Lisa shook her head, then reconsidered. "Yes, please," she said softly. Her mouth felt dry. As Mr. Patel poured tea for both of them, he spoke quietly. "You know, when I was younger, I used to clean airplanes between flights." He stirred his tea slowly. "It was my first job in the aviation industry. Minimum wage, night shifts, doing work most people never think about." Lisa held her teacup tightly, unsure where this was going. "One night, a first-class flight attendant saw me eating my dinner in the crew room. She told me I didn't belong there, that crew rooms were for real airline staff only." He smiled slightly at the memory. "I'll never forget how that felt." "I'm so sorry," Lisa whispered, her voice cracking. "What I did was unforgivable." "Actually," Mr. Patel leaned forward, "that moment changed my life. It gave me a dream, not just to prove that person wrong, but to create an airline where everyone would be treated with respect, regardless of their appearance or position." He pulled out a folder and opened it. "I've been reviewing your service record. 12 years with the airline. Consistently high performance ratings. Multiple commendations for customer service." Lisa stared at her tea, wondering how all those achievements felt so hollow now. "You're good at your job," Mr. Patel continued. "Very good. But yesterday showed me that our airline has a bigger problem. One that you helped me see clearly." Lisa looked up, confused. "We've been so focused on luxury service that we've forgotten what true luxury means. It's not about expensive wine lists or premium bedding. It's about making every person feel valued and respected." He slid a document across the table. "I'm starting a new initiative, a complete overhaul of our customer service training program, and I want you to help lead it." Lisa stared at the paper, then at Mr. Patel. "I don't understand. You want me to, after what I did." "Sometimes the best teachers are those who have learned the hardest lessons themselves," he said gently. "You understand now what it feels like to be on both sides, the person making assumptions and the person living with the consequences of those assumptions." Tears filled Lisa's eyes as she looked at the proposal. It wasn't a punishment or a demotion. It was an opportunity to turn her mistake into something meaningful, to help others learn what she had learned the hard way. Your experience, combined with this lesson in humility, could help change the culture of our entire airline. Mr. Patel said. That it is, if you're willing to take on the challenge. Through her tears, Lisa saw the sunrise reflecting off Singapore's towers. Just like the dawn breaking outside, she felt a new understanding beginning to dawn within her. This wasn't the end of her career. It was the beginning of something far more important. 6 months flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Lisa found herself in a completely different world from the first-class cabin she had once seen as the pinnacle of her career. Now she spent her days in training rooms and conference halls, sharing her story with hundreds of airline employees. I thought I knew what luxury service meant, she told a room full of new flight attendants one morning. I had memorized every wine vintage, learned the perfect way to fold a napkin, and could recite our menu in 3 languages. But I had missed the most important thing, seeing the human being in front of me. The training sessions weren't always easy. Some days, telling her story made her voice shake and her cheeks burn with remembered shame. But each time she shared it, she could see the impact in the faces watching her. Veteran flight attendants nodded in recognition. New hires scribbled notes furiously. Everyone understood that this could have been their story too. Mr. Patel's new training program went far beyond traditional customer service. They brought in experts to talk about unconscious bias. They organized workshops where employees shared their own experiences of being judged or discriminated against. Lisa worked closely with the team to develop real-world scenarios that challenged people's assumptions. Remember that passenger who made you feel uncomfortable? A senior flight attendant approached her after one session. We all have those stories, but nobody ever taught us how to handle our own biases before. The changes started small, but spread quickly. Crew members began sharing stories of how they caught themselves making assumptions and corrected their behavior. Ground staff reported feeling more confident in handling difficult situations. Customer satisfaction scores started climbing across all cabin classes, not just in first class. One day, while reviewing feedback forms, Lisa found a note that made her pause. It was from a young trainee. I used to think luxury service meant being fancy and exclusive. Now I understand it's about making everyone feel like they belong. The Airlines magazine did a feature on the new training program. They interviewed Lisa, but instead of feeling embarrassed about sharing her story publicly, she felt proud. Proud not of her mistake, but of what it had led to, a real change in how people were treated. Mr. Patel dropped by occasionally to observe the training sessions. During one visit, he pulled Lisa aside. You know, when I offered you this position, I wasn't entirely sure it would work, he admitted. But you've exceeded every expectation. Lisa smiled, remembering how terrified she'd been in that Singapore lounge. I had a good teacher, she replied. Your family showed me what grace looks like. The biggest surprise came when other airlines started calling. They wanted to know more about the training program, how it worked, what made it different. Lisa found herself presenting at industry conferences, sharing the airline's new approach to customer service with competitors. The best part, she told a colleague over coffee, is that I'm still learning every day. Just last week, a trainee pointed out something about privilege that I hadn't even considered. Between training sessions, Lisa still worked flights occasionally to stay connected with the day-to-day reality of airline service. But now, when she walked through any cabin, first class or economy, she saw people first, not their clothes or appearances. During one such flight, she served an elderly man in economy who reminded her of her grandfather. They chatted briefly about his grandchildren while she helped him with his meal tray. As she walked away, another flight attendant whispered, "You know that's the CEO of a major tech company, right?" Lisa just smiled. 6 months ago, that information would have changed her behavior completely. Now, it didn't matter at all. She had finally learned what true first-class service meant, treating everyone like they belonged, because they did. On a bright morning, exactly 1 year after the incident that changed everything, Lisa stood nervously in front of Pacific Global's main conference room. Behind those doors sat the airline's entire board of directors, waiting to hear her presentation on the training program's first-year results. She touched the small airplane pin on her lapel, a gift from Mr. Patel's son, made from the same amenity kit boxes he played with during that fateful flight. It had become her lucky charm, a reminder of where this journey began. Ready? Mr. Patel appeared beside her, carrying his own presentation folder. Lisa took a deep breath. Ready. She practiced this presentation countless times, but sharing it with the board felt different. These were the people who controlled the airline's future. The conference room fell silent as they entered. Lisa recognized some faces from magazine covers and news reports. Business leaders, investors, industry veterans. A year ago, she would have been intimidated. Today, she saw them as people first, titles second. Good morning, she began, her voice steady. 1 year ago, I made a mistake that could have ended my career. Instead, it led to the most important lesson I've ever learned, and a transformation in how our airline approaches customer service. She clicked to the first slide, showing customer satisfaction scores across all cabin classes. The graph showed a clear upward trend over the past year. But these numbers don't tell the whole story, she continued. The real change is in the stories our passengers and employees share. Lisa played a video compilation. Flight attendants sharing moments when they caught their own biases, passengers describing how welcomed they felt, ground staff talking about their newfound confidence in handling difficult situations. The board members leaned forward, watching intently. We've trained over 2,000 employees so far, Lisa explained. But more importantly, we've started conversations that needed to happen. We've created a space where people feel safe admitting their mistakes and learning from them. She shared letters from passengers, a teenage girl traveling alone who felt protected, an elderly man who was treated with dignity, a family celebrating their first trip abroad who felt like they belonged. Each story illustrated the program's impact in human terms, not just statistics. Our competitors focus on luxury amenities, Lisa said, nearing the end of her presentation. We've discovered that true luxury is making every passenger feel valued, regardless of their ticket class or appearance. It's about seeing the person, not the seat number. The room was silent when she finished. Lisa held her breath, waiting. Then the board chairman stood up, followed by others. The applause started slowly, then grew stronger. Remarkable, the chairman said, shaking his head in admiration. Simply remarkable. He turned to Mr. Patel. When you proposed this program a year ago, some of us were skeptical. But these results. The credit goes to Lisa, Mr. Patel replied. She turned a moment of prejudice into a movement for change. After the meeting, as board members filed out still discussing the presentation, Mrs. Patel appeared with their children. The older boy spotted Lisa and ran over, pointing excitedly at the airplane pin on her lapel. You're still wearing it. It's my favorite pin, Lisa told him, smiling. It reminds me of an important lesson I learned from your family. Mrs. Patel hugged her warmly. We're so proud of what you've accomplished, she said. You've helped create something truly special. Standing there, surrounded by the family she had once tried to remove from first class, Lisa felt tears welling up. But these weren't tears of shame like a year ago. They were tears of gratitude for the second chance that had become so much more than just saving her job. It had given her the opportunity to make a real difference in how people treated each other. The chairman's words from the meeting echoed in her mind. Sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the most important changes. Looking at the Patel family, Lisa knew that truer words had never been spoken. It was a special evening at Pacific Global Airlines' annual awards ceremony. The grand ballroom of the Singapore Marina Hotel sparkled with lights, filled with employees from every level of the company. Lisa sat at a table near the front, surrounded by her training team, partly believing how much had changed in 18 months. Her old first-class uniform hung in her closet at home now, replaced by a smart business suit. Though she occasionally still worked flights to stay connected with frontline service, her main role had evolved into something she never imagined for herself. Lead training coordinator for the entire airline's customer service department. "Look who's here," one of her team members whispered excitedly. Lisa turned to see Mr. Patel's family entering the ballroom. The children had grown, the toddler now walking confidently, the older boy taller and more mature. They spotted her and waved enthusiastically. As dinner was served, Lisa listened to conversations around her. A flight attendant was telling a ground crew member about helping an elderly passenger find his lost medication. A gate agent shared a story about calming a stressed mother traveling alone with twins. These weren't just service stories, they were stories of human connection. "Remember when we used to only talk about wine lists and luxury amenities?" her colleague whispered. "Now look at us." The awards ceremony began with typical recognition: on-time performance, safety records, customer satisfaction scores. Then Mr. Patel took the stage, and the room fell quiet. "Tonight, we're introducing a new award," he announced. "The Spirit of Service Excellence Award. This goes to someone who not only provides exceptional service, but inspires others to do the same." Lisa applauded politely, thinking about who might win. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed hearing her own name called. The spotlight found her as Mr. Patel continued. "Lisa showed us that true excellence isn't about perfect service. It's about learning from our mistakes and helping others learn too." Her story has become part of our airline's DNA, teaching us that luxury isn't about what we serve, but how we make people feel. Walking to the stage felt surreal. The whole room was standing, applauding. She saw faces she recognized from her training sessions, crew members she'd flown with, even passengers who had written to thank her for changing their travel experience. Mrs. Patel handed her the award, a beautiful crystal globe. Their older son gave her another handmade airplane, this one crafted from premium cardstock instead of amenity kit boxes. "I've been practicing," he said proudly. Taking the microphone, Lisa looked out at the sea of faces. 18 months ago, "I thought I knew everything about luxury service," she began. "I was wrong. Real luxury isn't about perfect napkin folds or memorized wine lists. It's about seeing each person's humanity." She held up the crystal globe. "This award belongs to all of you. Everyone who embraced change, who learned to check their assumptions, who chose to see people first and labels second. We're not just an airline anymore. We're proof that one mistake, handled with grace and understanding, can transform not just a person, but an entire company." After the ceremony, Lisa found herself surrounded by well-wishers. A new flight attendant told her that her story had changed how they approached their job. A veteran crew member admitted to having similar biases in the past, but learning to overcome them. Later that night, as the celebration wound down, Mr. Patel's family joined her at her table. The children were sleepy, but happy. Mrs. Patel touched her hand gently. "You know, that day on the plane, we could have filed a complaint. Instead, we saw an opportunity for change. Looking at all this now, I'd say we made the right choice." Lisa looked around the room, at her team, her colleagues, the airline family she'd grown to love in a whole new way. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself that day." The crystal globe caught the light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the table. Each one seemed to represent a life touched, a lesson learned, a moment of connection created. In the end, Lisa realized true first-class service wasn't about the cabin you served. It was about serving everyone with first-class humanity.